The quiet neighborhood's facade crumbled as a furious homeowner confronted the HOA president. "You can't just rename my street without my consent." The clash escalated, drawing a crowd, until a shocking revelation stopped them in their tracks. This was no ordinary dispute. The street was a historical landmark, and the HOA's actions put the entire community at risk. The fight had only just begun. Martha Harrison stormed out of her house, the morning sun glinting off her steely gaze. She marched across the freshly manicured lawn, her fists clenched at her sides. Reaching the curb, she glared at the new street sign that had been hastily installed overnight. Maple Grove Way, it read, in crisp black lettering. Martha's lips curled in disgust. This was not the name of her street. It had been Oak Ridge Road for as long as she could remember. She whirled around as the HOA president, Jennifer Larson, emerged from her pristine white SUV. "What is the meaning of this?" Martha demanded, gesturing angrily at the sign. Jennifer smoothed a hand over her perfectly coiffed hair, an indulgent smile on her face. "Good morning, Martha. I see you've noticed our little improvement." "Improvement?" Martha spat. "You've changed the name of my street without consulting the residents. This is unacceptable." The smile vanished from Jennifer's face, replaced by a look of exasperation. "Oh, please, Martha. It's just a name change. It's not like we're tearing down your precious historic homes." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "We're trying to make the neighborhood look more upscale. Maple Grove Way has a much nicer ring to it, don't you think?" Martha's face flushed with rage. "This is my home, Jennifer. You can't just decide to change its identity on a whim." The two women glared at each other, the tension palpable. Slowly, a small crowd of neighbors began to gather, drawn by the heated exchange. "What's going on?" a voice called out. Martha turned to face the crowd, her expression fierce. "The HOA is trying to rename our street without our consent," she announced, her voice carrying across the quiet cul-de-sac. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the crowd, and Jennifer's smile faltered. Now, everyone," she said, raising her hands in a placating gesture. "There's no need to get worked up. This is just a simple name change to improve the neighborhood's image." "But Oak Ridge Road has been our address for decades," Mrs. Wilson, an elderly resident, piped up. "It's part of our history." "Well, times change," Jennifer replied dismissively. "And as the HOA president, it's my job to ensure this community keeps up with the times." Martha stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You don't have the right to decide that on your own. This is our neighborhood, not your personal playground." The crowd erupted in a chorus of angry shouts and protests, the peaceful cul-de-sac now a battleground. Jennifer's face flushed with embarrassment as she tried, in vain, to regain control of the situation. It was clear that this was no ordinary dispute. The fight over the street's name was just the tip of the iceberg, and the entire community was about to be drawn into a heated confrontation with far-reaching consequences. The shouting match between Martha and Jennifer continued, the tension escalating with every passing moment. Neighbors on both sides of the conflict began to take sides, hurling accusations and demands at the HOA president. "You can't just change the name without our vote," one resident shouted. "This is an outrage," another cried. Jennifer raised her hands, trying to calm the crowd. "Everyone, please. I understand your concerns, but this decision was made in the best interest of the community." Martha scoffed. "The best interest of the community? Or your own personal agenda?" Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "How dare you, Martha? I've been working tirelessly to improve this neighborhood." "By erasing our history," Martha retorted. "This street has been Oak Ridge Road for as long as any of us can remember. It's part of our identity." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Jennifer's face flushed with frustration. "Well, the decision has been made," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. The street signs have already been installed. There's nothing you can do about it now. Martha stepped forward, her expression resolute. We'll see about that. With that, she turned and stormed back towards her house, the crowd parting to let her through. Jennifer watched her go, her lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't over, Martha, she called out. The HOA board stands by this decision. But Martha didn't look back. She was already formulating a plan to fight the HOA's unilateral actions. As the crowd dispersed, a sense of unease settled over the neighborhood. The once peaceful cul-de-sac had been transformed into a battleground, and the residents knew that the conflict was far from over. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the warring factions, a lone figure observed the scene from the shadows, a small smile playing on their lips. They knew something the others did not, and they were about to throw a wrench into the HOA's plans. That evening, Martha sat at her kitchen table, poring over a thick binder filled with historical documents. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she flipped through the pages, searching for the answers she needed. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and she let out a triumphant gasp. "Aha!" she exclaimed, quickly jotting down a few notes. Grabbing her phone, she hurriedly dialed a number. After a few rings, a voice answered on the other end. "Hello, Mrs. Wilson. It's Martha. I think I've found something that might help us stop the HOA's name change." As Martha outlined her plan, Mrs. Wilson's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious optimism. By the time the call ended, the elderly woman was nodding decisively. "I'll rally the others," she said. "We'll meet at your place tomorrow morning." The next day, a small group of concerned residents gathered in Martha's living room, their faces etched with determination. "All right, everyone," Martha began, addressing the group. "I've been doing some digging, and I believe we've got a way to stop the HOA from renaming our street." She proceeded to lay out her findings, her voice growing more animated as she spoke. The others listened intently, their expressions shifting from disbelief to dawning realization. "You mean?" Mrs. Wilson breathed. "Oak Ridge Road is a historical landmark." Martha nodded emphatically. "Yes, according to these records, our street was designated as a historical site back in the 1970s. The HOA doesn't have the authority to change the name without proper approval." The room erupted in a flurry of excited chatter, neighbors exchanging hopeful glances. "This is our chance to fight back," Martha declared, her eyes shining with determination. "We need to get in touch with the Historical Preservation Society and the City Council. If we can prove the significance of our street, we might be able to stop the HOA's plans in their tracks." The group quickly mobilized, dividing up tasks and strategizing their next moves. The battle lines had been drawn, and they were determined to protect the history and identity of their beloved Oak Ridge Road. As the meeting adjourned, a sense of cautious optimism filled the air. The residents knew that they were up against a formidable foe in the HOA, but they were more resolute than ever to defend their community's heritage. The next day, Martha and a small delegation of residents marched into City Hall, determined expressions on their faces. They were granted an audience with the City Council, and Martha wasted no time in presenting their case. "Oak Ridge Road has been a part of our community's history for decades," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's a designated historical landmark, and the HOA has no right to unilaterally change the name." The council members listened intently, their brows furrowed in concentration. One of them, a stern-faced woman named Councilwoman Briggs, leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "And you have the documentation to prove this historical designation?" she asked, her tone skeptical. Martha nodded and produced a thick folder, handing it to the councilwoman. "Every record we could find, including the original designation from the 1970s. Briggs flipped through the documents, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the pages. The other council members craned their necks, peering over her shoulder. Finally, Briggs looked up, her expression grave. "It appears you're right, Mrs. Harrison. Oak Ridge Road is indeed a protected historical site. A collective sigh of relief swept through the group of residents, but their triumph was short-lived. However, Briggs continued, raising a hand to silence the murmurs. The HOA has already installed the new street signs. Changing them back will require a formal process and approval from the Historical Preservation Society. Martha's face fell. But surely you can intervene and stop the HOA from moving forward with this change. Briggs shook her head regretfully. I'm afraid our hands are tied, Mrs. Harrison. The HOA president, Ms. Larson, has already filed the necessary paperwork. We can't override that without going through the proper channels. The residents exchanged uneasy glances, their hopes dashed. Martha opened her mouth to protest, but Briggs held up a hand. However, the councilwoman continued, we will expedite the review process with the Historical Society. If they determine that the name change is a violation of the landmark designation, we'll be able to intervene and force the HOA to revert the street name. Martha nodded, her expression grim. We'll do whatever it takes to protect our community's history, she said, her voice laced with determination. As the residents left City Hall, a sense of unease hung in the air. They had bought themselves some time, but the battle with the HOA was far from over. The following week, the residents of Oak Ridge Road gathered once more in Martha's living room, anxiously awaiting news from the Historical Preservation Society. The tension in the room was palpable as they sat in silence, the ticking of the clock punctuating the uneasy stillness. Suddenly, the sharp ring of a phone shattered the quiet. Martha rushed to answer it, her heart pounding. Hello. Yes, this is Martha Harrison. She listened intently, her expression shifting from hope to dismay. I see. I understand. Thank you for your time. Hanging up the phone, Martha turned to face the group, her face grave. The Historical Preservation Society has reviewed the documents, she announced, her voice barely above a whisper. They've determined that Oak Ridge Road is indeed a protected historical landmark. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, but Martha raised a hand to silence the cheers. However, she continued, her eyes downcast, they've also ruled that the HOA's name change does not violate the landmark designation. The room erupted in shocked exclamations, the residents' faces twisted in disbelief. What? Mrs. Wilson cried, her frail voice quavering. But how can that be? Martha shook her head, her expression pained. Apparently, the Historical Society believes that a simple name change doesn't constitute a significant alteration to the landmark's character or integrity. The residents exchanged looks of bewilderment and outrage, their hopes crumbling. This is an outrage. One of the younger residents shouted. The HOA is getting away with this. Martha raised a hand, silencing the uproar. I'm afraid so. The Historical Society's decision is final, and the City Council is bound by their ruling. The room fell silent, save for the muffled sobs of a few residents. Martha's own eyes were glistening with unshed tears, her heart heavy with the weight of their defeat. But we can't just give up, she said, her voice trembling with determination. There has to be something else we can do to stop the HOA. The residents nodded, their expressions steeling with renewed resolve. They had come too far to surrender now. The battle for Oak Ridge Road was far from over. In the days that followed, the residents of Oak Ridge Road regrouped and began to plot their next move. They knew that the HOA's victory was a bitter pill to swallow, but they were determined not to let the matter rest. Martha, spearheading the resistance, reached out to various local media outlets, hoping to bring more attention to their plight. She knew that public scrutiny could be a powerful weapon against the HOA's machinations. One sunny afternoon, a local news crew arrived on Oak Ridge Road, cameras in hand. Martha eagerly greeted them, ushering them towards the newly installed Maple Grove Way sign. As you can see, she told the reporter, her voice laden with frustration, the HOA has unilaterally decided to change the name of our historic street. Despite our efforts to stop them, they've managed to get the Historical Preservation Society to rule in their favor. The reporter listened intently, her brow furrowed in concern. That's quite remarkable. So the residents of this community have no say in the matter. Martha shook her head emphatically. Absolutely not. The HOA has made it clear that they don't care about our concerns or the history of this neighborhood. As the news crew captured footage of the disgruntled residents, a familiar figure emerged from one of the houses. Jennifer Larson, the HOA president. What's going on here? She demanded, striding towards the group with a look of irritation. Martha turned to face her, her expression unwavering. We're bringing attention to the HOA's unilateral decision to rename our street without our consent, she declared, her voice firm. Jennifer's eyes narrowed, and she glanced nervously at the news crew. I don't appreciate you involving the media in our internal affairs, she snapped. This is a private community matter. Martha scoffed. Private? You're trying to erase our history, Jennifer. This concerns the entire neighborhood. The two women squared off, their faces mere inches apart, tension crackling in the air. The news crew captured every moment, their cameras whirring. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. Mrs. Wilson, the elderly resident, had collapsed, her face pale and drawn. Someone call an ambulance. Martha cried, rushing to the woman's side. As the chaos unfolded, Jennifer Larson slipped away, her expression a mixture of guilt and alarm. The battle for Oak Ridge Road had taken an unexpected and troubling turn. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its siren wailing through the quiet neighborhood. Paramedics quickly tended to Mrs. Wilson, their expressions grim as they assessed her condition. Martha hovered nearby, her face etched with worry. She had known Mrs. Wilson for decades, and the thought of losing her dear friend was almost too much to bear. As the paramedics loaded Mrs. Wilson into the ambulance, Martha turned to the news crew, her eyes pleading. Please, she said, her voice trembling, you have to keep covering this story. The HOA's actions are putting our community at risk, and now they've even endangered one of our own. The reporter nodded solemnly, her expression empathetic. We'll make sure the world knows what's happening here on Oak Ridge Road, she promised. With that, the ambulance sped away, its siren fading into the distance. Martha watched it go, her heart heavy with a sense of dread. In the days that followed, the news coverage of the Oak Ridge Road saga intensified. Local outlets ran segment after segment, highlighting the residents' plight and the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. The pressure on Jennifer Larson and the HOA board mounted as angry phone calls, letters, and social media posts flooded their offices. The once untouchable HOA president found herself on the defensive, forced to justify her actions to an increasingly skeptical public. Despite the public scrutiny, however, Jennifer remained steadfast in her determination to rename the street. She argued that the change was necessary to revitalize the neighborhood and attract wealthier homebuyers. But the residents of Oak Ridge Road refused to back down. They organized protests, circulated petitions, and even threatened legal action against the HOA. The battle lines had been drawn, and neither side showed any signs of surrender. As the conflict escalated, the health of Mrs. Wilson became a central focus of the ongoing saga. The elderly woman had been hospitalized, her condition precarious, and the residents blamed the stress and upheaval caused by the HOA's actions. Martha, in particular, was devastated, her anger and determination fueling her unwavering commitment to the cause. She vowed to do whatever it took to protect the legacy of Oak Ridge Road, even if it meant risking everything. The fate of the historic street, and the well-being of its residents, hung in the balance, as the battle between the community and the HOA raged on. Weeks passed, and the battle for Oak Ridge Road only intensified. The media coverage continued unabated, with reporters and camera crews constantly swarming the neighborhood, eager to capture the latest developments. Martha, spearheading the resistance, became a familiar face on the local news, her impassioned pleas for justice resonating with viewers. She spoke eloquently about the neighborhood's history, the importance of preserving its identity, and the HOA's callous disregard for the residents' wishes. Meanwhile, Jennifer Larson, the embattled HOA president, found herself increasingly on the defensive. Her attempts to justify the name change were met with skepticism and outrage, as the public grew increasingly sympathetic to the residents' cause. The tension came to a head one afternoon when Jennifer confronted Martha on the street, her composure cracking under the weight of the relentless scrutiny. "This has gone on long enough, Martha," she hissed, her eyes wild. "You and your little band of troublemakers are making a mockery of this community." Martha stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "We're not the ones making a mockery, Jennifer. You are, with your arrogant disregard for our history and our wishes." The two women glared at each other, the air thick with animosity. Suddenly, a scream pierced the stillness, drawing their attention to the nearby sidewalk. Mrs. Wilson, the elderly resident whose hospitalization had become a rallying cry for the community, was lying on the ground, her face contorted in pain. A pool of blood was spreading around her, and chaos erupted as neighbors rushed to her aid. Jennifer's face drained of color, and she took a step back, her eyes widening in horror. Martha, without a moment's hesitation, rushed to Mrs. Wilson's side, cradling the woman's head in her lap. As the ambulance wailed in the distance, the true cost of the HOA's intransigence became painfully clear. The battle for Oak Ridge Road had claimed a victim, and the residents knew that they could no longer afford to back down. With renewed determination, they vowed to fight on, their resolve hardened by the sobering realization that the fate of their beloved street and the well-being of their community hung in the balance. The climactic showdown was approaching, and neither side was willing to back down. The future of Oak Ridge Road and the legacy it represented would be decided in the coming days.